There you go. Welcome back. My name is Dean, Rose Between Two Thorns. If you're watching us on YouTube, or you can watch us anytime, Crier Media, or at the Dean Blundell Show on YouTube, you see what I'm talking about. You can also follow us anywhere you get your fine podcast, which today is in conjunction with my friends at Field Trip Health. Fieldtriphealth.ca. Listen, I've been telling you about these guys. I've been talking about these guys. I've been tweeting about these guys for some time. And if you've been battling depression, anxiety, PTSD, sleep disorders, addiction, or chronic pain, and you feel like you've tried everything without lasting relief, I have something that you need to hear about, and you need to hear about it today. And joining me again, the Rose Between Two Thorns, that's me. The Two Thorns would be a couple of really smart guys at Field Trip Health, including the CEO, Ian Ruberry, who is on my left, if you're looking at the screen, and on the right, boy genius, Ketamine Assisted Psychotherapy wonder, and one of the founders of Field Trip, Dr. Mario Nucci. I feel like I should clap because it's like the thing you do when you have guests on, when they give you your time. But I don't want to demean you with like this golf clap, especially after today, because I just wanted to let you guys know I'm officially in mourning over that Bills loss, like officially in mourning. Like, I don't know if you watched it. We haven't pre-talked about it. I think today would be a great day to start my ketamine assisted psychotherapy, to be quite honest with you. I think I have PTSD.
I feel your pain, and I was rooting for the Bills myself, Dean. So, I'm sorry on behalf of all Bills fans too, man.
Bills Mafia. Yeah. Where they're like, Ian, they're like the Leafs of the NFL. I mean, it's just, instead of the first round, it's an AFC championship. And instead of Boston, it's Kansas City year after year after year.
I turned on the game, just in the event that they got it started up 24-0 or had a big lead or something like that. Same reason why I turned off the Philly game. I just couldn't bear the anxiety throughout the middle of it, but I had my phone open with the score just so I could keep up with the news. But the anxiety of watching those games is just tough.
Through the roof, especially if you're a fan. You guys are Bills fans, I take it? Yeah?
I'm a Bills fan, yeah. Not like a diehard fan, but a lot of my friends are Bills fans and grew up in the GTA, and so I just support them, almost as a therapist through all these tough years.
I'm actually born into a Raiders family, so but I mean, this run I certainly have been supportive of the Bills, but not anymore for the rest of the season, right? So.
Yeah, well, just one more game, but I mean, yeah, right. I just want to approach something real quick. As the owner of a wellness clinic, Ian, are you telling me that your anxiety is way too hot watching a Bills game, that you're one of those people that has to watch like half of it from a room, like around the corner like this?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just kind of keeping my eye on the score, but not trying to get too invested in it emotionally.
Right. Those are the stories we tell ourselves about our teams now. I don't know if you're Leaf fans, but I don't talk about them during the regular season anymore. And once you get to the postseason, it's like I park every expectation. I send out an obligatory tweet to a couple 100,000 people, and I'm like, you know what, guys? Let's just enjoy what happens. Like, if there's no more like, I'm a booster for this team, they're going to go deep this year. And I said the same thing about the Bills yesterday. No more content today. I'm just going to watch the Bills game because I can't do it without feeling like an idiot anymore. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like you step all over yourself now.
Our emotions thrive off of those high expectations, right? So it's just better to have none, stay neutral, and if they win, great. If they don't,
I know.
Watch the interviews.
I think it speaks to like some kind of treatment schedule I might need to, because like I can't watch a game without having like a magic talisman in my hand. Like I've got an old Bills hat that I watch games with. Somehow think it's going to bring me good luck. But yeah, terrible day for Bills fans. I feel sorry for them. You guys, are you both from Thunder Bay? Little history here. I know we just finished a podcast about a month ago. You both from the Thunder Bay area? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, both from Thunder Bay.
You grew up together a little bit?
Yeah, Mario and I met in university. I was in my 5th year, came back from exchange in the UK, and Mario was in his 1st year, and we both joined the Lakehead University Board of Directors of the Student Union, and we became friends there. Yeah.
Okay, and so you guys obviously working now. Like, what is this? 15 years later. You guys work together at Field Trip Health. Ian, you're the CEO, and Mario, you're the founder. But as I understand it, because I'm fascinated with your origin story before we get into Field Trip and psychedelic assisted therapy, ketamine assisted therapy, psychopathy, some questions people are asking me now that we're talking about you guys. How do you get into this? Like how everybody has an origin story. Like you go to school to be a doctor, and as I understand it, Mario, Doc, you finished med school at 22. Were you on the tip of ketamine assisted therapy early because you're a genius?
Dean, I've always been interested in novel therapeutics and innovation, and so
even as a young teenager, were you right?
I would say as a pre-med and med student, I've always been interested in the future of medicine and taking medicine into a beautiful age where we have more therapies, more advancements for people, and so I've always been trying to keep up with the literature on a variety of different new and innovative ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to mental health, the reality is after SSRIs and psychotherapy, we just haven't had a lot of new innovations. So, for example, in major depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, PTSD, we just didn't have a lot of different things. And so a lot of that is really just we don't understand how the brain, this beautiful organ that we have, really works and how it works in the context of psychopathology. And so some analogies have really, likened where psychiatry or mental health is to where cardiology was, in the early industrial era of the 1800s, right? We just started to be able to do measurements and these types of things. So I was always curious and passionate about novel therapeutics. I gained a real appreciation for mental health during my med school and residency training. Really, I mean, if we don't have good mental health, mental well-being, it's the main filter through which we experience our lives, right? It's the main filter for our quality of life, right? And so I think that our mental health and mental well-being should be really central and to at least be on par with our physical health and physical well-being. And so, I have been following the literature on ketamine, psychedelics, in that period, early in med school and then thereafter. And, I got to use ketamine with some patients in my residency training, and I saw them get better, and that left a profound impact on me. And I really wanted to use the tools that were available to help as many patients as I could. And I started using ketamine early in my practice. And it sort of was one of these things that spread, by word of mouth. Psychiatrists, psychologists, family physicians, people in the community knew that, I was helping people and people were getting results, and it just kind of grew organically from there. And so that's very brief story.
Yeah, it's almost too brief. I wanted more.
More. I can tell you lots more, but
well, you're kind of a fascinating tale, right? You're really one of one. You're the founder of the premier psychedelic assisted therapy, ketamine assisted therapy clinics across this country of ours. You're young. What are you, 34? You graduated med school when you were 22. Ian's just as accomplished on the finance side as well, being young go-getters. But your origin story, in as much as you go to med school, like to graduate when you're 22, did you go in at 12? Is that?
I got the acceptance letter when I was 19.
Yeah.
These are like, I guess, call them accolades or whatever that I don't like to talk about too much, but that is the truth, that those are true facts.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it points to, to me, someone who's, at the forefront, the vanguard of really life-changing breakthroughs in mental health recovery and relief for people that have really serious issues that have been plaguing humanity for quite some time, right? So you look at it through a different lens, and that's why, I'm trying to figure out, or at least get a little backstory on, hey, this kid who's really interested in different aspects of medicine, his interest is piqued when it comes to, mental health and how different compounds might interact or help people recover, and going through med school and then saying, you know what, I need to use ketamine in my practice in some capacity, but, being able to figure out that capacity, was that from the interest that you had in the actual subject, or was that in the opportunity that seemed to be there in terms of what Field Trip Health does now?
Yeah. I guess, in my clinical practice starting out, I saw patients with a variety of mental health conditions, and some of those patients happen to meet criteria for treatment-resistant depression and other treatment-resistant mental health conditions. And so they met criteria for a trial of ketamine, and then the practice evolved into what's now ketamine assisted psychotherapy to layer on an even further benefit for the patient. And really, my interest was sparked out of my interest in novel therapeutics and new ways of helping and making people better, and really just a fascination for these types of therapies, right? Like traditional therapies, while they can be fantastic for patients and really help provide relief for some cohort, they don't have the same rapid onset, rapid relief, the same effect sizes as some of these other medicines like ketamine assisted therapy and the psychedelic therapies are emerging to show as well. And so, in the interest of wanting to give my best to patients, I really started exploring these things. And, I attended conferences and trainings, and, went to train under different folks and learn different things with respect to this type of care, and really just keeping a good pulse on the literature. And then, we developed a evidence-informed and evidence-based approach. And now we're thankful to be able to help a lot of people.
Yeah, thousands, specifically even this year. Is this is ketamine assisted therapy, psychedelic assisted therapy, Ian, Doc, is it new to Canada, speaking in terms of, what the market is, or our availability for people that have, some of these psychopathies? Because I know it's fairly saturated in the United States already, but what is the sort of marketplace or readily available ability people have to be able to access ketamine assisted therapy in Canada like right now?
Yeah, I'd say it's relatively new here. Mario started up the clinic at Thunder Bay in 2019. And around the same time, you had the bulk of the players in Canada. You had 3 publicly traded companies raise money and get excited about it around the same time. And then as they built up their teams, COVID hit. And we know how uncertain COVID was. Especially when you're seeing people in person. This is an in-person therapy, right? And you had a lot of players trying to figure out the delivery model. How do I deliver this service to clients who need it and make it available? Think about it like the first Tesla car dealership, right? How do I get electric cars to Canada? How do I get ketamine assisted psychotherapy to the folks who need it? And I think there was a lot of struggle with that. In fact, when we kind of started expanding, being from Thunder Bay, I don't know if you've been to Thunder Bay, Dean, but it seems like you're stepping into 10 years in the past.
Oh, that's being generous. I've been there for a couple of hockey tournaments for my son, and it felt more like a good solid 25.
Yeah,
like a good generation.
So let's say 15 years. We'll call it 15 years. Okay, 15 years in the past. And what happened is, think about when Uber came to Canada, right? Toronto got it. A lot of the big cities got it. And then smaller cities, maybe they get it never, and you have other players coming into the market. In Thunder Bay, we have U-Ride, which is a smaller player. And so our goal initially was, well, how do we get care to people in these communities so that they're not getting it 15 years later, like a lot of the other technological advances that we see happening? And so we opened our first expansion clinic, I believe in 2022 in December in Sault Ste. Marie, to try to see, I have family there and our director of operations has family there. And it was really the challenge to Mario to say, hey, Mario, if you're in Thunder Bay and you're not in Sault Ste. Marie, can we still help people in Sault Ste. Marie? And so we were able to do that. And then it was really what are the biggest markets so we can have the biggest impact and help the most amount of people the fastest. We continued to grow, but as we were starting on that journey of increasing accessibility around the country, the biggest players kind of were at their wits' ends, and a lot of them went into bankruptcy or pulled out of Canada. Not because the treatment isn't fantastic and works, like Mario said, has a higher effect size than most treatments in a treatment-resistant population, but because you had people leading them, those companies that just couldn't get the model right to figure out a way to scale effectively in a sustainable way so that we can be here for our clients over the long term. And so what we did is we acquired the Field Trip Health brand out of bankruptcy in June of 2023. And we took over the clinics in Toronto and Vancouver. We helped Numinous exit the market in last year in about August or September timeframe, maybe October. We took over the clinic in Montreal, and then we've opened 2 new clinics in Kitchener-Waterloo and in Hamilton. So now we're operating 8 clinics across the country. We've tried to, what was initially just trying to help people access it who didn't already have access. We didn't expect that we'd have to come in and save access for the big cities that already had it. And so now we've kind of stabilized those clinics, and our goal is just to, find payers, get insurance companies to cover it, collective bargaining agreements, indigenous groups, anywhere where there's funding right now that can be reallocated to more effective treatments. That's really kind of our focus.
And you talk about more effective treatments. I appreciate that, Ian. That's a great backstory. Kind of speaks to, the journey that Dr. Mario's been on from the get-go, and seeing the opportunity not just to help people, but seeing the opportunity to help people in a real quick, long-lasting way. What is, Doc, what is that? Like, you start down that road. Obviously, we're going to get into the clinic setting, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the services and efficacy rates and different psychopathies as you treat them, because I think this is we live in this weird time where, mental health, emotional wellness, trauma leads to so many terrible outcomes for so many people. And that's really the key benefit in terms of how I understand ketamine assisted psychotherapy. It's, not only are you getting that immediate relief from the ketamine, but you're also able to unwrap a bunch of that trauma through talk therapy. Those are the 2 most important components of ketamine assisted therapy. So if people are sitting there listening to me going, oh yeah, you just do a bunch of ketamine, you feel good. Okay, whatever, and it's already got the stigma attached to it, but that's not it. But what lights went on when you started to go down this road of treating your clients with ketamine assisted therapy? What were some of those examples where you're like, this is something that I have to champion, and this is the future of my practice?
Sure. So when I was a resident, a trainee doctor, essentially, I was in a rural northern Ontario, and there was a patient who was on a Form 1. So basically, he was kept in the hospital for suicidality, and the patient couldn't go to a bigger center. They couldn't go to Thunder Bay. They couldn't go to Kenora at the time, and they were on full packet of medications for their mental health, and medications weren't going to make this patient better. They had already had electroconvulsive therapy. So my preceptor, my supervisor at the time, was an anesthesiologist and a family doc. And they were familiar with ketamine, and we discussed the literature at the time. This was 2015. We discussed the literature on ketamine, and we talked to the patient and had an informed.
And is ketamine legal at this time for clinical use?
Yeah, so ketamine is legal. It's been legal in Canada for a while. It's been around. Ketamine, the medicine, has been around since the 1960s, synthesized in 1962. It's legal for anesthesia. So in high doses, to put it simply, it disconnects the thinking part of the brain from the feeling part of the brain. So it doesn't change aspects of breathing, and doesn't really change aspects of blood pressure and heart rate like the other anesthetics do. So it's considered a very safe medicine. Like, you can give a large dose of ketamine to somebody and you won't really hurt them. So ketamine legal for anesthetics, and it's around it's in low doses is what we use. So about a quarter to 1/10 of the dose that we would use for somebody for anesthesia is what we would use in the mental health setting.
Okay.
So rewinding the clock back to 2015, we used ketamine on this patient, and her suicidality went away. She described it was like a cloud lifted off my head. There's less noise in my head. I'm feeling better. And so the patient actually only had 2 treatments of ketamine, 2 days apart. And we now have a more evolved approach from, when that was done. But the patient remained in remission for at least several months afterwards, after I had followed up. And so that anecdote really stayed with me. And as I went on into independent practice, I really found, the need for novel approaches to treatment-resistant patients. And so just talking to some data, there was a reanalysis of a pivotal trial in the mental health space. Trial is called the STAR-D trial. And basically they showed that, after trying 4 antidepressants, I think the number was around 38%. Only a smaller percentage of patients actually achieved remission, which is really low. By the time you get to your 4th antidepressant trial, it's about a 20% response rate and 10% remission rate. And so we need novel therapeutics. And so that initial anecdote spoke to me. And then as I went into independent practice and I had referrals from psychiatrists, psychologists, family physicians, people started getting better. But not only did they get better, but they got better rapidly and quite profoundly. And they made changes that they felt that otherwise would have taken many, many years. And sometimes they tried it for several decades and didn't get better. And so for me as a clinician, being able to deliver that kind of relief to a patient was just the most rewarding thing I've ever done.
Must have been mind-blowing to you, right?
To be able to take away somebody's suffering and to help them to live better and to feel better. It's really rewarding. I mean, that's why I'm a doctor. That's why I'm doing this. And so having patients get better and seeing the results, I just made a commitment to how do I help more people with this type of care. And so that's how the practice really evolved. Initially, I was doing these treatments in hospital settings, and it was just ketamine type of approach. And then, I became familiar with the psychedelic assisted therapy approaches and ketamine assisted therapy approaches.
So let me just ask you a quick question then. So you treated this gentleman that you're talking about. This is where the light switch goes on, and you're like, wow, right? Like, this works. He's got relief for several months. He's got immediate relief. That was without talk therapy. That was just ketamine.
That was just ketamine. Yeah, that was just ketamine in that scenario.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt. I did. I've got the squirrel of a brain, so you're gonna have to bear with me.
No worries. And so, depending on the data source you cite, somewhere around 67% of patients with just ketamine that are in a treatment-resistant cohort for depression, and there's a study on PTSD showing similar as well, will get a response. Okay, but then you look at some of the neuroscience of ketamine, and you look at this literature on altered states of consciousness and the therapeutic use of altered states of consciousness. So one of the things that we know from the neuroscience literature on ketamine is it turns down this part of the brain called the default mode network. So when we're idle, when our brains are at rest, we have this part of these connections called the default mode network. And when we have psychopathology, it's thought that default mode network is part of that psychopathology. And if you have depression, you're going to have rumination, you're going to have a lot of negative thoughts. If you have anxiety, it's going to be worry, worry, worry. If you have intrusive thoughts from OCD or compulsive compulsions to do certain behaviors. And so the default mode network is thought to be part of that fixed pattern of thinking and behaving. So we know that at least, temporarily, whether it's a few days lasting several weeks, we know that ketamine can turn down that default mode network. And so if you can turn down that default mode network, and one of the other things we know that ketamine can do, and other psychedelic medicines as well, is they can induce neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, so the growth of new synapses or new connections in the brain. So what we really have is we have this altered state of consciousness where people can take a step back from their problem. They can see things in a more dispassionate way, become an observer rather than an experiencer or acting on their problem. And if you can combine the benefits biologically and the breaking down of that fixed pattern of thinking and behaving, and combining that with psychotherapy, the research bears out that we can create more enduring results so that the effects can last longer, and you can get a higher effect size. In other words, you can help more people to break through. And so we've seen this with patients with trauma-related conditions or complicated grief or mental health conditions where there is a significant psychological component in addition to what may appear to be a genetic or biological one. And certainly there's interactions between those, and my description is simplistically segregating into those categories. But when we combine ketamine with the experiential portion, we can have more profound and more enduring results for patients. And so the practice evolved from just ketamine to adding in this ketamine assisted psychotherapy approach, and really allows us to help that many more people.
Yeah, and those numbers are stark, Ian, to what Mario was talking about. Just a quick infographic. Treatment and response rate. So, and it helped me understand if these numbers bear out. And then we'll get to the talk therapy portion, which is what you lead the country in. Treatment of antidepressant or psychotherapy alone, one or the other, 30% response rate, which means 30% of people experience some type of relief. If I'm to understand that correctly, antidepressants or psychotherapy combined, 35.7. So using an SSRI and some talk therapy, 35.7% response rate or relief rate. Ketamine on its own is around 60%. Is that number right?
Yeah, so it depends on the literature source. Like, for example, in 2016, there was a trial that confirmed that twice a week protocol that we used, randomized controlled trial by Singh and colleagues. It showed a 67% response rate with just ketamine. There's some, a meta-analysis of real world data showing some around 50%, some will show in the 70% range. But I think fair to say that number is a reasonable number for a treatment-resistant depression cohort. But then again, like I said, if you add in the therapy aspect,
what is that number? That's what I want to get to, is like just ketamine alone replacing an SSRI has a response rate that's roughly 3 times as successful, right? As far as what I've understand in all the research that I've done, which is not as much research that you have done being an MD. But what is the research that I've also seen when it comes to taking that 60% and then adding the talk therapy portion, somewhere between 80 and 90% relief or success rate or response rate. Is that right?
Yeah. So that is some of the data that we've seen. So Field Trip, independently published a retrospective analysis of its patient cohorts, and I think Ian can send you that publication, and that seems to have been the effect size in that range. And so various others have published some research on ketamine assisted psychotherapy approaches, and they seem to get in that around 80%, some 78, some 90. But again, it depends on the sample, the cohort, and that kind of thing. So,
but Ian, Ian, those numbers. Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, that's stark. I mean, the difference, the disparity between traditional treatment with SSRIs and maybe some therapy, right? Even if you combine those on any schedule, the disparity in the response rate, the relief rate, is astronomically different, Ian.
Yeah, and where it gets exciting really is, if you're trying antidepressants for the first time, they're very accessible. You can go to a walk-in clinic, you can go see your doctor, you can try it. And I think the number Mario said, there was 38% of people are going to, find something that allows them to work, right? it's going to allow them to live life in a pretty meaningful way. But once you move down to those folks who have tried, 5, 6, 7 antidepressants, it starts to become pretty hopeless down at that bottom of the curve, right? The response rate down there is like 10 or 12%, and it gets smaller every further trial that you try as you're exhausting kind of all of those options. Whereas in that population, so folks who fit that treatment-resistant population, that number for ketamine-assisted psychotherapy doesn't really change that much. That response rate's still up there in that 80% category. So it could be that you've tried 7 or 8 antidepressants or SSRIs, and now for you, trying ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is going to be 800% more likely to, 8 times more likely that you're going to get a positive response rate. So that's really where we're seeing a lot of the value. This isn't a first line treatment, so it's not for those who, haven't been diagnosed with anything, haven't tried SSRIs, or maybe you don't want to try SSRIs, but you haven't tried talk therapy, for instance. The recommendation is you should try these other treatments first. And then if you're deemed treatment resistant and you're on your way down that curve, which again is often pretty hopeless, then those are really the folks who should be considering treatments like ketamine assisted psychotherapy.
Yeah. Well, what is remission, Doc? Like, let's talk about that real quick, because I think that's interesting, because you can say that, there is no cure for depression. There's no cure for PTSD. There's no cure for anxiety. There are, treatments that can get you to a certain point where you can go and live a really healthy, happy life, as I understand it. But this is as close to it as I've seen in any treatment setting or in any evidence-based information that I've read or research that I've read, that not only is this rapid and not only is it long-term and effectively, side effect free because you're not using SSRIs, but I want to qualify what that relief or remission or response is that gets you to that number, and the numbers that we're talking about and success rates that we're talking about of between 80 and 90% success rate. What goes in? What are the metrics to those success rates?
Yeah, great question. So in the clinical trials, they use validated clinical scores for whichever mental health condition they're studying. So, for example, in depression, there's a particular set of scales, Montgomery-Åsberg scale, that's administered by clinicians, and it can give you a sense of the severity, and you can get a quantitative number as to how severe someone's symptoms are. There's another score called the QID score. So depending on the study, different metrics are measured. And response rate is generally measured by a 50% reduction or a certain threshold of scale reduction in terms of PTSD. So something that would be considered clinically meaningful. So say reducing somebody from, severe symptoms to a moderate symptom or to a mild symptom burden. So again, we call this heterogeneity across studies, but suffice to say that response rates are measured by a clinically significant reduction in symptoms. Remission rates, essentially is no longer meeting criteria for that condition, is what we would describe remission rates as. Okay. So when we say, by the time you try your 4th SSRI and, you haven't gotten a response, that's 20% of patients will respond, 10% will achieve remission. We're talking in those clinically validated scales. And then in the ketamine category, we're talking about a 50%, reduction in scales, and remission being no longer meeting criteria for the diagnosis.
Meaning that diagnosis is no longer a diagnosis because you've gotten your score when it comes to depression, PTSD, anxiety down to a point where it doesn't necessarily qualify as a diagnosis for whatever psychopathy you were diagnosed with.
And that doesn't mean that these patients don't have a risk of relapse. That doesn't mean that we don't need to put in a relapse prevention plan. That doesn't mean that the patient can, just no longer ever have to worry about their mental health. It just means that at that point in time, they no longer meet criteria. So they've had a a real beneficial response to the point where they don't meet criteria anymore for that particular condition. And so they may have some symptoms, but it's what we call subsyndromal, or below the threshold for clinical significance for the diagnosis.
Is this like the holy grail of mental health treatment?
What I want to say is that no medicine is a panacea.
Right.
And I will say that it is exciting to see that a lot of our colleagues in medicine are seeing these types of approaches and are seeing that. So, for example, there's a task force, Canadian Mood and Anxiety Task Force. They put out guidelines in 2021. They came out and said that ketamine is third line for depression. So they're seeing that ketamine is an evidence-based treatment for treatment-resistant depression. So we're starting to see paradigm shifting that way. I do think that medicine-assisted therapy is a paradigm shift. I would say that, what I call it the holy grail, I would say that it's probably one of the most profound treatments and treatment paradigms that we have in mental health. And I think that between ketamine assisted psychotherapy, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and neurostimulation protocols, I think that we certainly will be able to move the needle forward for a lot of patients that have treatment resistance. And so, those numbers are, up to a third of patients with your common conditions like major depressive disorder. Some data even shows around 50% of patients with PTSD, a third of patients with obsessive compulsive disorder. And so with these newer approaches, we can really move the needle for these patients. And so, again, I'm going to caveat by saying no treatment is right for everyone. No treatment's a panacea, but these are powerful tools in the toolkit. And for the right patient, they can make a profound difference.
Well, it bears out. It bears out in the numbers. It bears out in the evidence. It bears out in the studies, and it bears out in your business. I mean, you're a healthy, growing business that's been able to, not just scale what you do from, helping a couple hundred people to helping, thousands of people in the last, year to year and a half. I mean, and you see this, like, the reward that you get, you speak to that at the start of the podcast, the reward that you get for actually helping some of these people. Because if anybody has ever struggled with, as I have, as many of my friends and family have, whether it's genetic, whether it's traumatic, whatever reasons that go into giving you a certain psychopathy of depression, anxiety, PTSD, I mean, that's the pandemic of our time. I mean, in my lifetime, it is crippling for so many people. To get that relief over a long period of time, specifically if you've been on some type of scheduled SSRI treatment plan, and you're still experiencing or qualifying as having that diagnosis, you wonder when it's going to end, right? And so when you hear stories like this, and that this service is available for people, it to me, it sounds like not just you talk about third line. It sounds like it should be not just readily available, but it sounds like we should be putting all of our effort as a sick society into trying to figure out how to qualify, how to get everybody to understand what this is, and then pushing this into the fore, regulatorily speaking. I don't know if that's a word. I use those a lot. Words that aren't words, by the way. You're welcome, boys. From a regulation standpoint or from an awareness standpoint, what are the issues that you see now, both either of you, in terms of, hey, listen, we're seeing these numbers. We need to sell this. We need to sell this, to the FDA in the United States. We need to sell this, to the government of Canada. We need people to understand that this is truly one of the most remarkable and profound tools that we can use to treat a sick society. Because we're not just talking about what comes with mental illness and emotional illness. We're talking about the effect that it has on the physical body of the human being that is struggling and has struggled probably for decades.
Yeah. And so I would say that, markets just in general, when there's new things coming out, they take a long time to develop. So typically, I think that it's the average of, it's about 17 years it takes from, say, drug or new therapy discovery to actually getting to commercialization. And Health Canada, is very conservative. They're taking care of the entire country, right? Whereas, we use ketamine in what's called off-label use. So it's a little bit more aggressive, if you will, by taking research in an earlier stage and applying it to clinical practice, right? Even if it's a drug like ketamine that's been around for, since like the 1970s, and we know all the safety data. It just takes a really long time to get things going. And so my view is that, it's tough to disrupt healthcare in Canada, right? It's tough to come in and say, hey, here's something, here's a new treatment that's available. It's very effective. We want to see more research from academics. So we're working in partnerships with various universities, University of Ottawa, for instance, and University of Alberta, and we're sharing data where we can and working on clinical trials together. Mario maybe can talk a little bit more about those. But these things take time, and so our view is, whoever's suffering today who wants to access these types of treatments, we want to get them the care first. I really believe the proof is in the pudding. So, if we, like I said, if we go from, helping 20 people a year in 2019 to helping 1,000 people a year here in 2025, that's a step in the right direction. If we can find other payers for these treatments, use insurance benefits that already exist, and just figure out where those currents are in the healthcare system today, where those buckets of funding are, so we can help the right people. That's really our goal. And then hopefully, fast forward 5 years, all the police officers and all the veterans will be doing this, after they see something that's that could trigger PTSD, and it's start of a regular regime in some groups. And then from there, more research gets done, more people know about it, and eventually the market develops where we can get the government to start subsidizing this. I think we're still a ways off from that. The research is definitely there. We just need to give some time for the government to catch up and some of these payer groups to start to catch up. And I think that happens as more and more people to go through the treatment themselves. And we just get that experience in the demographics.
What's the pushback you get from payers in the government?
Well, it's we met with Veterans Affairs Canada, and they'll approve veterans for treating depression, but they won't for PTSD. And I would say if you're somebody who reviews a lot of research, you'll see there's really good research for both. Is it the exact same level? No, but we published data, or Field Trip Health did, and you can see that it's pretty similar under pretty large groups. And I hate, you hear the stories that Mario's told about clients who have been suffering for decades. Our belief is like those folks shouldn't have to suffer today just because of the period of time that they're suffering, that, the research level isn't at that top level that needs to be there, or, whatever organizations like Veterans Affairs need to see it. We think there's enough research there today that we want to help those veterans today, right? They shouldn't have to suffer today. So we're a little bit more aggressive on that side, and Mario can talk more about the kind of the intricacies there on the research side.
So Dean, I mean, in an ideal scenario, there would be deep pockets for large, high level randomized controlled trials for every mental health condition, with respect to these emerging therapies like the ones that we use at Field Trip Health, like Ketamine Assisted Psychotherapy, Psilocybin Assisted Psychotherapy, MDMA Assisted Psychotherapy, RTMS, stellate ganglion blocks for PTSD, which we do have, some randomized controlled trial data there. In an ideal world, we would have, multiple randomized controlled trials for everything. And there are, in fact, a lot. And governments and payers move slower than the speed of research and innovation. And so it's good that some insurers, it's good that there's some coverage from Veterans Affairs. We've been advocating with Indigenous Services Canada and IHB for some of our therapies as well. The regulatory walls, despite the data, are slow, and you'll even see that in, for example, the FDA in the United States. despite 2 well-done phase 3 clinical trials for MDMA assisted therapy, the FDA is asking for a 3rd phase 3 clinical trial from the group that's behind MDMA assisted psychotherapy, their regulatory submission there. And so, some of it is a paradigm shift. Some of it is the lack of big pharma push, right? Like, for example, we don't have a lobbying group that goes and meets with doctors and that is educating and is saying, hey, prescribe this medicine, right? And so it's really incumbent upon us as a group of passionate clinicians to share the data, to have the conversations, to share patient cases, to discuss what we're doing. And, strategically, we have allocated to some research projects and research collaborations. If I had more resources, I certainly would love to do more clinical trials. And we're excited to talk about that. We're doing MDMA assisted therapy clinical trial and psilocybin assisted psychotherapy trial coming this year in 2025. We have ongoing ketamine assisted psychotherapy trials with University of Ottawa, looking at some genetic biomarkers and other things. And so we're doing our part, but it's really medicine paradigm shifts take time, but they also require education to cross that gap. The data is very profound, and just it's really just about some of those regulatory changes take time.
Yeah, and regulatory changes specifically around an industry that likes to spend a lot of time freezing people out, right? And when it comes to the way universal healthcare works in this country, and same thing in the United States, right? If there's no reason to change it, there's no reason to change it, which bothers me as someone that has experienced, incredible healing effects from psychedelic assisted therapy in a really controlled environment. Like, I think this is a lot of things that people don't understand is that, this is a medically supervised talk therapy that you can't get anywhere else in this country, specifically in Canada. This is, and it's not just ketamine, right? Like, and I want to kind of get into that because, all psychedelics are not the same, right? Like the psilocybin doesn't have the same effect as ketamine, and there's different drawbacks to that. MDMA, same thing, it's different to psilocybin and ketamine. Take me through, if you can, real quick, because or not even real quick, because I'm enjoying this conversation. Thank you, gentlemen. Take me through why the different modalities at Field Trip. Like, you've got ketamine assisted therapy. Is that good for, all kinds of depressive issues, whether it just be depression, PTSD, and anxiety? Is psilocybin maybe better for depression? Is MDMA maybe better for PTSD? Kind of walk me through the psychedelic treatment portions as you at Field Trip Health kind of are dictating sort of, how this goes, because it's so groundbreaking.
Sure. So what I'll say is a few things is that data and accessibility really influence the clinically based decisions that our clinicians at Field Trip Health make in terms of which therapies to use for a particular patient. So, and I'll compare and contrast a little bit for you ketamine assisted therapy and say, for example, psilocybin and MDMA. So ketamine, as we discussed, is readily available for licensed prescribers in Canada. And so it's more accessible to be used. The other thing is that the treatment experience for the patient is a 1 hour experience with the medicine. And there is some, obviously with the therapy portion, there's some preparation beforehand and integration. And so that clinical experience.
Well, you're saying like the effect of ketamine is only an hour, right? The dose that you give in a clinical setting. Okay.
That's
good.
right.
Thank you.
That's right. Whereas with psilocybin or MDMA, the effects can be 6 to 8 hours. Okay. So for the MDMA clinical trials, again, the group MAPS published 2 phase 3 clinical trials, very well done, readily accessible to readers. The patients, generally speaking, needed around 2 to 4 of these 6 to 8 hour treatments with preparation and check-ins throughout the process. And so, there's more time needed for some of these other treatments. But again, the effect sizes are really high with just, for example, MDMA assisted therapy, where, for example, around 70% of patients didn't meet criteria for PTSD after the treatment, and something like 86% of patients got a treatment response. So again, MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD, per the studies, very high effect size, very effective. Now in Canada, the MDMA and psilocybin are not legal. They're scheduled medicines, but we can apply to Health Canada for special access for particular patients, or use them within a clinical trial setting.
Is that based on a compassion setting? Is there like some sort of trigger that you? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So in other words, we write a letter and submit a form. Essentially, we submit a form to Health Canada and say, this patient has tried numerous treatments, and this study validates that this may be a reasonable treatment option for this patient, and we'd like the use of this medicine. And so unfortunately, then it's left in the government's hands, and it can take sometimes a long time to get back an answer for the patient. And initially, when there weren't as many applications, perhaps the turnaround time might have been a bit quicker. But yeah, unfortunately, that process takes time. It's not guaranteed, and there's uncertainties there. So it's not as easy as a prescriber just saying, yeah, you know what, you need this, and I'm going to prescribe it for you, and we're going to do this per the protocol. It's dependent on this sort of layer of government infrastructure that in order to access it.
Okay.
So and that will change once the large clinical trials for example, psilocybin are finished, and there's an application to Health Canada to approve this for the use for whatever indication, like, for example, treatment-resistant depression, right? So my hope is, in 2025, Compass Pathways, who is the closest to the psilocybin phase 3 clinical trial. Phase 3 trials are sort of what you need to get over the FDA's hurdle. Once they get good data and they apply to the FDA, I'm hoping they'll come knocking on Health Canada's door. Generally speaking, it's about a year later, and some consultation with Health Canada on pricing. And then we'll be able to access these treatments more readily for our patients.
Oh, so, you guys are doing those randomized studies too, right? Like, I think you're doing, if I'm not mistaken, you said you were doing an MDMA study and a psilocybin study. Ian, is that correct? This year?
Yeah, both in groups, so we can bring the cost down a little bit.
Good.
And for wellness, so folks won't need to, have an indication, of depression or anxiety or PTSD. They can be a high performer who just feels a little bit off, and they feel like they could benefit potentially. So it's actually for the indication is wellness. So really excited to kind of really open the doors and increase accessibility there, which is kind of in line with the values.
Where do you get people for the study? Can anybody partake in it, or can they contact you if they want to be part of it?
Yep. Right now, our team is building out a wait list. And then as soon as we get the trial started, what we'll do is we'll reach out to all of them to get them into their groups.
Okay. Fieldtriphealth.ca. By the way, I'm talking with Ian Ruberry. He is the CEO of Field Trip Health. Dr. Mario Nucci, who is the founder and chief clinical physician. Can I just say that? Is that a real thing? Chief clinical physician? Sounds really cool.
You can say it. I'll allow it.
I'll allow it. I appreciate that. Getting back to all psychedelics are not the same. To your point, walk anybody that's listening through this. I said I had mentioned that I had done a psilocybin treatment weekend with 8 other people. You had a couple of docs, you had a couple of psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors that were also involved in this. For the administration of it. It was over the course of 48 hours. And it's unlike ketamine, because ketamine, as you point out, you come in, you can leave in an hour and you're feeling pretty good. I mean, the side effects wear off in no way, shape, or form. And I can tell you this after doing a hero dose, as they call it, of psilocybin, you're not going anywhere for a solid 8 to 10. because you're in the atmosphere. You're doing the deep work, and unlike ketamine, it's one of those things. I shouldn't say unlike ketamine because I haven't done my treatment yet, but my experience with psilocybin wasn't just restorative for those 6 to 8 hours, and it goes by, right? Like it goes by. It was fun. I enjoyed it. People that I've talked to that have done your treatments had fun, enjoyed it. Also did some really hard work when they did their talk therapy. That some of it wasn't enjoyable, but that's the business of unwrapping trauma. Right. So for a lot of people that don't understand the way this works, psychedelics are psychedelics. I mean, we're talking about, you say the word MDMA, you're talking about a large group of people that like to show up with glow sticks to a barn where there's a DJ having a good time, right? Like, that's it's not a stigma, but that's generally how people, the layman understands what MDMA is. Do you have that? A lot of people kind of giving you that feedback, when they're doing these treatments where they're like, hey, not only did because hey, psychedelics are like psychedelics, and some people can be uncomfortable. Some people can have, as they point out, bad trips, if I can use those words. But what's the feedback that you get from people when they're doing their actual ketamine assisted therapy, or you have taken them through the MDMA or the psilocybin assisted therapy?
Yeah, so I've had a couple of family members who went through the full protocol at Field Trip Health. And, I would walk them home from the clinic and, talk to them about their experience. I would say that, yeah, folks who are treatment resistant, with depression, anxiety, PTSD, it's very different mentality going into it than you would say if you were a recreational drug user. And I'll say from the other side of it, nobody I know, and I'm sure it's the same with Mario, doing ketamine assisted psychotherapy is not going to create the want or desire to be a recreational drug user. It's kind of like, I guess on the recreational side, people are excited, not specifically for the drug all the time, but they're in a good place and they want to amplify that, maybe if that makes sense, right? If you're going to a music festival, you want to amplify that feeling of excitement and enjoyment. We're here, our clients, we are amplifying it for sure, but depending on the state that they're in, we could be amplifying traumas, right? And during that time, we're amplifying them so that we can peel back those layers of the onion, and so we can work through those traumas. So it's a little bit different, although maybe that amplification part is very similar. The state that you're in when you're going through the treatment is a lot different than the recreational side. And then, another part that comes up a lot, people often ask me, is about addictive properties.
I get a lot of inquiries about your services because I'm a big fan. I can read. And so, I like to pass that information on, so people will ask me, and I've, and you and I know this, I've put a couple of friends on to you, and they're like, I'm worried that it's addictive. I'm like, right. You know what? I think those are questions you need to kind of clear up. And I think a lot of people would love to hear about that because, it's probably one of the biggest questions around this, depending on how old, what the history of the person is. I would love to hear more.
Yeah, and when I was learning about ketamine and ketamine assisted psychotherapy, because I didn't know very much about it prior to talking to Mario about it, but I actually searched on ChatGPT, to say, hey, compare on a scale of 1 to 10 ketamine's addictive properties compared to opioids, because I thought this is kind of the question that most people are going to want to know the answer to, right? And the answer was that opioids were 9 on that scale, and that ketamine was 3. And really what that means, any drug can be abused. Chocolate can be abused. People can be addicted to that. But ketamine doesn't really show the addictive properties that a lot of these other drugs that we hear of or we think of, like stimulants, cocaine, things like that, when we think about drugs that are being abused. It doesn't really have those properties. I would say that clients, we've never had a case ever since 2019 of a client doing ketamine assisted psychotherapy and then becoming addicted to it. That's not something that you see. And I think Mario mentioned this already, that the anesthetic dose that you would get if you were to go for a surgery is anywhere from 5 to 10 times the dose that we're using in clinic. So if that was the case that people would get addicted to it, you'd see a lot of people getting addicted to ketamine after surgeries where they're doing like 5 to 10 times the dose, and we just don't really see that. So, you know, hopefully that kind of answers your question. Not really any addictive properties to ketamine more than, you know, a food that you would eat.
Yeah. And I'll follow on to that. And really it's, you know, in the trials with ketamine and ketamine assisted psychotherapy in controlled doses, in controlled clinical settings, you know, we don't see hallmarks of what you would call addiction or, you know, dependency, people seeking the substance. So actually the author of the CANMAT guidelines in Canada, she published an independent review of ketamine treatments in Canada and found that same kind of thing, that, you know, they didn't really seem to see that type of addictive property in those settings. You know, that's not to say that with very large sample sizes, you know, that we wouldn't see a signal there. But again, you know, out of you know, abundance of caution, trying to do the best for our patients. That's why these medicines are given in controlled clinical settings. There's follow-up. There's a number of clinicians involved in the care for patients, and you know, we can have these conversations.
Yeah, I was shocked too to do a little reading that actually ketamine assisted psychotherapy. You're seeing some incredible stats come out when it comes to the treatment of addiction.
Yeah, and so I'm excited to talk about that. There was a 2022 study for alcohol use disorder by Grabsky and colleagues that showed that 3 ketamine sessions plus a psychotherapy approach showed 86% abstinence rates at 6 months. So alcohol use disorder can be a really difficult condition to treat. And that kind of data is really, really exciting, really heartwarming. And I mean, we've seen it in some of our own patients as well. And so, you know, again, we talked about reasons why. We talked about breaking out of that fixed pattern of thinking and behaving. We talked about processing past traumas, mental health conditions otherwise can be factors that lead to use of substances. So if we can help those, we might be able to help the substance use as well independently. We know that ketamine can normalize some aspects of brain function. That's where that neurogenesis and neuroplasticity comes in. And so we do see signals in other conditions as well, like stimulant use disorder. So we actually got a grant to study ketamine assisted therapy for stimulant use disorder. But another group used a single dose of ketamine plus psychotherapy, and they found around 60% reduction in cocaine use, or, you know, 60% effect size. It was really, you know, again, really profound data. But again,
let's just back up. I mean, you gloss over this because you read it all the time. Like, you know, let's just back it up. So 86% response rate for alcoholics.
86% of the time over 6 months, these patients were abstinent, basically.
That is incredible, dude.
It is a really heartwarming stat, and that's why the NIH in the UK, as far as I understand, is sponsoring a larger trial to further validate those results. And so, yeah, I mean, for patients with alcohol use disorder, this has a lot of potential. So again, there's other.
Do you know why I find that interesting? Is I read a stat yesterday because I'm involved with a guy named Guy Felicello, who's an you know, an addictions advocate, you know, and he's a fan of Safe Supply. And I just wanted to kind of bring this up just to further your point. Since 2016, over 130,000 people have died due to alcohol-related illness. Alcoholism, specifically now, liver disease, what comes with it, is again, it's an epidemic in this country. It's an epidemic in North America because it's so widely available. It's used for everything else. Only 50,000, and I say only 50,000 with all due respect to anybody who's lost somebody due to any kind of opioid or toxic drug addiction when it comes to stimulants. That number's around 55,000, same period of time, you know, so those numbers, as someone who talks to people, helps guys, works with guys on, you know, with their drinking and their alcohol addiction, because it's something that I've struggled with in my life and something that I've been fortunate enough to get on top of. And I talk about it willingly ad hoc. I'm happy to share my story with anybody. This is like one of those moments in a podcast where I'm like, this is unreal because it is a major keyhole to wellness for people. And I'm not a guy that tells people not to drink. I'm not that guy, but I'm the guy that's like, the hard work is in these dark rooms where you demean yourself, you go to therapy and you feel like you're not doing yourself any favors, and you got through, all kinds of 12-step and, doing these things. And if that success rate is what it is, Doc, it's not just heartwarming. It gives me chills for people that struggle with alcohol addiction.
Yeah, it's incredible, and there's incredible potential. And again, I get very excited about these things, right? I mean, like, I know how people struggle with, alcohol. We'll call it alcoholism, the clinical term alcohol use disorder. Like, I know how people struggle. The first line medications can be effective for folks. Psychotherapy, 12-step programs can be effective for folks. But again, this is another powerful tool in the toolkit to help. And, we're all for that. And again, exciting. We excitedly await further data, and we're happy to help patients in the ways that we do. But yeah, we're at a very exciting time for mental health where we can really potentially help a lot of folks.
Another one, Mario, that maybe you could talk about is postpartum depression. I'm at the age now, Dean, where a lot of our friends in Toronto, in the GTA, and back home in Thunder Bay, have kids or are having their second kid, and I see a lot of women struggling with postpartum depression, and even just the fear these days of having kids because of the risk of postpartum depression. And there's been some very encouraging studies that have come out. And Mario, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was if you are identified as being high risk for postpartum depression after childbirth, a single ketamine session in a low dose in a clinical setting reduces that risk by 80%.
There was a study done that showed those results, and it really just speaks to the potential for this type of treatment across multiple psychopathologies, right? We're happy to be able to provide this type of care because of the potential.
No kidding, dude. I've talked to you guys multiple times. My mind gets blown by stuff with you every time I talk to you. So I appreciate it. And by the way, not only can you go and do, a psychedelic treatment, psychedelic assisted therapeutic treatment at Field Trip Health, and we'll get to locations in just a minute. I want to talk about the rooms you get to do it in too in your clinic setting. Like, look at these spaces. I want to rent it for a nap.
No, definitely a lot of our clients feel like having a nap after their treatment. So a lot of time we kind of have a recovery lounge where you can journal and kind of just reflect and unpack and start processing a little bit of the experience you just had and some of the emotions and some of the characters that potentially came up during those experiences. But yeah, all the centers are purpose-built for ketamine assisted psychotherapy. So we've kind of thought of everything from the types of blankets that we use to noise canceling headphones to aromatherapy, anything that really changes up the environment. So it's a very safe and comfortable environment, right? A lot of times we're dealing with traumas and pulling back layers of the onion, and so we really need to make sure that we're in a spot. We have a rapport with our therapist. We feel supported every step of the way, so that we can dig kind of through our ego and start talking about these things that are really difficult to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about getting better, right? And unwrapping trauma isn't a lot of fun. Reliving terrible memories that have put you in fight or flight for, 20 years, 30 years, that have given you insomnia, that have led to addiction. I mean, to that point, having a nice setting where you can do that, or, it looks like you can also bring your own snacks. I might, you never know what happens with me. I might come in there with a little lunch bag, some goldfish, and go, okay, let's talk. But, when you're doing that and you're unwrapping that trauma, it's work, for anybody that has had to go and make amends with themselves, or anybody who's had to be honest with themselves. The ketamine, it sounds like, as I've kind of understood this, puts you in a place, takes you out of that negative default setting, which you talk about. I call it that negative thought pattern, that kind of hamster wheel that you get in, where you're ruminating and you're going back and forth, which this will never get better because your brain's trying to keep you safe and not let you try life anymore. That's what fight or flight is. That's what that default setting is. It gets you to a point where you can actually be able to look at that trauma, where you can actually step outside yourself. We've talked about it in previous podcasts. I experienced that in my psilocybin weekend. I don't know, did I ever tell you guys about that? Like this out of body experience that I had, where I literally, and I'm happy to tell people about it, where I do my dose and I start going through the therapeutic setting. And the goal for me was to stay as far away from terrible memories as I could, and hope the medicine just worked. Hope that, my mind would start working a little bit better again. The synapses would start firing again, to the point where I could kind of go around the trauma. Nuh-uh, nuh-uh. The first thing that I saw in my head was me literally looking at myself as a child, and then taking my child's own hand, which was me, walking down this dark hallway, and all these tired, angry versions of myself came out of walls wearing, like, old tired armor, like really bizarre. And then I walked towards this altar and I looked at this version of myself, this child, which I couldn't see his face. I could just see the back of his head. I was wearing a sharp red turtleneck as is like a 6-year-old in my what I was experiencing. Um, and I said, okay, let's kill all these versions of me, because I'm tired of them. I'm embarrassed by them. I don't want to talk about these traumas. And I'm like, no, 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 no. We need to get to know them. We need to help them, and we got to take them with us. I get emotional talking about it right now, because I had never been able to say it, because we run away from these versions of ourselves that we don't like. We don't want to unpack any trauma. We don't want to relive it, because we're already jacked up to 10 in fight or flight. Our nervous system's telling us to forget about it. Our minds are telling us to forget about it. And that was in the first hour. So for the next 6 hours, I literally went to war with myself, but it was this experience that I could have, because the medicine took me out of myself and enabled me, and the medicine worked, and it enabled me to look at myself and fix different parts of, the perception that I had of what I was going through, what I was dealing with. And that, I mean, I get goosebumps talking about it, but that seems to be that universal language that, psychedelic assisted therapy is able to communicate on. And it seems to be a very common experience. I'm sure you could share that in different areas of your clinical setting, Doc. Is that seems to be a very common perspective that a lot of people have when they go through this, which is, the medicine puts me in a place where I can deal with it. You see all kinds of incredible things, but those incredible things all seem to relate back to you being able to finally face, deal with, unwrap, and put a bow on trauma.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. We had a patient who, very similar to your story, with in his case, ketamine assisted psychotherapy, where, he met with his childhood self in his safe space in the forest where he would run away to as a child, and he had an emotional reconciliation with his childhood self, and really just deeply and profoundly felt that, hey, he reassured his childhood self that everything is okay now. There's no need to fear. Things are okay. And after that, just, profound reset of that hypervigilance, hyperarousal, just a complete change in that patient after the profound experience. And yeah, absolutely, that having the medicine and being able to do the deep work with the medicine, the results bear out that it can be profoundly healing for patients.
Yeah, it's an incredible experience. If anybody hasn't had it in a clinical setting, you are the first name in psychedelic assisted therapy. You're at the forefront of it. You guys are young, you're smart, you're committed to helping people, giving people relief in this space, and you're widely available across Canada. I just want to get to a couple of things. The locations, you're in Ontario. Real quick, and I want to get to the Ontario locations: Toronto, Ottawa, Hamilton, Kitchener-Waterloo, Thunder Bay, and the Soo. The Soo. If you haven't been to the Soo, go to the Soo. Montreal, Vancouver, Regina, and really, something that's incredible is your at-home delivery service. And I just briefly touch on that if you can, because if you can't get into a clinic and you can't access this, life-changing, perspective-changing treatment, you're trying to bring this solution to people's homes, Ian.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of in line with our initial mission of providing care in areas that didn't have it, right? Mario often uses the term getting the care to those who need it. We didn't expect to be picking up the pieces of the entire industry, and we didn't want to get distracted from our goal either. And so part of it was, clinics are expensive to open. They take time. You have to staff them. So part of the model we moved to was, well, how do we help somebody in Timmins, right? How do we help somebody in North Bay? How do we help somebody in Chatham-Kent? These areas that, likely aren't going to have clinics in them anytime soon. So what we've done is we've created the at-home program where essentially we hire nurses in the area where we have clients who need it. We'll do all the training internally, so we get them all up to snuff so that they understand how ketamine assisted psychotherapy works. And then what we'll do is we partner with pharmacies and we ship our the ketamine doses to our nurses, and the nurses will drive and administer right in your own home. Okay, so we'll sit with you there for the full hour-and-a-half appointment. And then in terms of the psychotherapy portion, because we already have all the therapists who are trained and have a lot of experience here, we do the therapy portion virtually. Okay, so we can essentially right now, we've just started to roll it out, but we can help anybody in rural Ontario, Quebec, or British Columbia. And so right now we're hiring a team of nurses to do that. And part of that goal of just getting anyone in the country who feels like they could benefit from this therapy and qualifies for this therapy to be able to increase accessibility so that they have it this year in 2025. And then from there, we're going to look at opening, and we're currently talking to the regulators in Manitoba. So they're reviewing all of our documents and processes and everything. We're educating the regulator on really the research and how this works and how we're helping people so that we can start to bring this to more provinces as time goes by.
Wow, thank you for doing that and getting people care who need it. Specifically where it's not available. I mean, in as much as it's an effort for you to put a program like that together, obviously it's a labor of love. You're still offering people relief. You want to make sure that people have no excuses when it comes to, advocating for their own mental and physical well-being. And I think it's a wonderful program, dude. I really do. And thank you both for, being as committed as you are. Thank you for being visionaries. Doc, way to go. Nicely done. Took a 22-year-old med student genius to be able to kind of go, let's put a couple of these beauties together and see what happens. And the relief that you're giving so many people, even friends of mine that are now not just looking into the service, booking their discovery calls, which everybody can do at fieldtrip.ca. Listen, this is exactly fieldtriphealth.ca, pardon me. This is exactly what you need if you are not just out of options, if you're looking for some kind of beautiful maintenance program for yourself, specifically with the ketamine assisted psychotherapy. I mean, that's a couple hours and you could be back to work depending on your schedule and depending on, what you're working on with the healthcare professionals and the medical professionals at fieldtriphealth.ca. You can go there and book your discovery call. You can book online. You can make a referral to a friend of yours. You can make a referral to a family member on their website under their contact heading as well. You can have a look at all their services. Again, fieldtriphealth.ca. You can check out all their locations, their at-home program. It truly is a remarkable service. You guys are doing some incredible work, and I'm just really grateful I could get through this without crying after that Bills loss. So thank you, gentlemen, for taking some time to join me today.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks a lot for having us, Dean.
Anytime.
Ian, it's been a sincere pleasure, and I look forward to chatting again sometime soon. Thanks
Yeah,
so
me
much.
too. Next time we talk, you guys need to knock those beards down because you make me look prepubescent on a phone call with mine. So do me a favor. Take those Thunder Bay chin nests down a little bit so you look like me.
Sounds good.
Thanks, boys. I'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
There you go. Ian Ruberry, CEO of Field Trip Health, and of course, Dr. Mario Nucci. He is the founder and the lead physician at Field Trip Health. Just good dudes, smart guys, on the tip, unafraid, wanting to help people. It's what we need. We need more people like that. There's pioneers, and I don't say those words lightly. These are young, smart pioneers who have their head down, trying to help as many people as they can who are out of options, not interested in SSRIs, trying to help family members and friends with some of the things that hold us back more than anything else, which is, poor mental health. PTSD, depression, anxiety, mental health care should be the most important thing you can do for yourself. And these guys are giving people their lives back. They're nurses, they're therapists. They're giving people their lives back, including friends of mine, and hopefully mine as well. I know they will. So please go and visit them today. Book your discovery call. You can book online. There's a nice little referral program they've got as well. Go to their contact heading. Again, fieldtriphealth.ca. Can't say it enough. Fieldtriphealth.ca. Go there today and check them out. And this is brought to you by my partners at Field Trip Health. I love doing business with good people. And these are good people. And I don't advocate anything that I don't actually completely 100% believe in. And they're offering you a free initial appointment for your consultation. If you're curious about their services, your chance to learn more about this innovative treatment, ask questions, see if it's the right fit for you. There's zero obligation. You will never get pressure from these guys. You can take a 90-second quiz. You can book your call, have a quick 15-minute phone call, and they'll be able to help you understand whether or not this is right for you. And I think it might be for a lot of people who are just so tired of the same routine, so tired of new drugs, so tired of new counselors. I'm telling you, it works. The efficacy is there. The numbers are there. The evidence-based information, the data is there. And it's legal in this beautiful country of ours. So I highly encourage you to get in touch with my friends over at fieldtriphealth.ca. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks. Don't forget to rate, subscribe to the podcast anywhere you can on Spotify or Apple, also YouTube, Crier Media, Dean Blundell Show on YouTube. You can get us there and go and check us out as well at crier.co, Crier Media, again, crier.co, and go and visit my friends at Field Trip Health today, fieldtriphealth.ca. Have a great day. See you soon. Bye.